to this episode of Parallel Lives. This is the second part of the first episode that we did on a study that's called Parallel Lives, a phenomenological study of maladaptive daydreaming. Uh, I don't think I butchered that word too badly, but this is my co-host Demer,
Hello.
and then we have Taylor as part of the guests today as well.
Hello.
Cool. Should we just start where we ended off?
Yeah, we had left off on I don't know, like almost towards the end of it on the section titled MD content. And this section goes over content. Imagine that. So they kind of make note right in the beginning, that the content is very varied, which I think as maladaptive daydreamers, we kind of all understand. If you've talked to other maladaptive daydreamers anyway, like there's so many different ways that these stories sort of manifest themselves in our brains. But they did sort of for this find two, they call it two main overarching MD themes. One, relationships and family life, and two, social status. And kind of most of what they found fell into one of those. Do you guys feel like yours would fall under one of those umbrella categories?
So for me, I think it's both, but I feel like the relationships part would be, yeah, probably relationships and family. Because social status, I mean, I don't really care about that. I'm more into the personal stuff. So yeah, it would probably be more towards the relationships and family stuff.
Honestly, yeah, I do get like the whole like relationships and like social dynamics of the daydreams. Like, I don't know how to really answer that. But I don't know. That's a confusing one. It sounds so confusing to me.
Yeah. I feel like mine would be both. Like I'm not in my daydreams, but I do like a lot of the stories, the individual stories are just about the characters' relationships. But there's also this element of social status. Like not my social status, but most of the characters that I follow are like cool or badass or awesome in some way. Even the ones that aren't, if that makes sense. Even the ones that have sort of, shitty, awful lives. They're not, how do I say that?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say that it makes sense to me, like what you're trying to explain with like the social status of characters who, might not have had the best lives, or maybe, sorry, I don't want to speak over you. I just relate to what you're saying with the characters of the like their social status. It's like for me, it's the villains. Like if I have villains in my daydreams, then they would be better people, if that makes sense. Well, that's how I view it, at least.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. Like, honestly, a lot of my daydreams like take place around status. Like, for example, a lot of my characters are like kings and queens, like they rule over all these people. I have a lot of like I don't do many like family dynamics, but when I do, it's usually like super chaotic and like a lot of my characters are evil, but like in a sense we're like I don't know, I can acknowledge they're evil, but I still love them because they're my little brain children.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to explain is like maybe less social status and more social capital. Like even the ones who have no status, they have some sort of social capital, even if it's something like pity.
Yeah, like there's a lot of like social dynamics there. Like even if the character isn't like royalty, for example, they still have this kind of like power in the daydreams. Like I don't know how to explain it, but I hope you can understand.
Yeah, I definitely do because I feel like I have the same thing. I just it's hard to explain how someone can have zero status but still garner this social status, just not in the traditional sense.
Right. It's more of like they're still important. So
Yeah.
they still play their role, even if it's not like on a superficial level, it might not look like it's a lot or whatever, or maybe to the outside world it might not look like a lot, but to you as a maladaptive daydreamer or to us as maladaptive daydreamers, they have purpose, which is it's interesting and it's yeah, quite cool.
I feel like the real world equivalent would be what people call like the suffering Olympics. Have you ever heard that term?
Suffering Olympics, huh?
Yeah, so it's like I'm sure we all have this friend or acquaintance in our lives where you'll say something like, "Oh, my dog is sick," and they'll come back with like, "Well, my dog has cancer." It's always a one-upmanship, but not of positive things, of negative things.
Okay.
You'll say, "Well, I have to take this pill every day," and they'll say, "Well, I have to take 4 pills 6 times a day." And, like, that's how some of my characters are. Not that they're like that, not that they would say it because, oh, my characters are, morally so superior. They're modest, but people do that. I mean, not that I'm a psychologist or know the mechanisms behind it, but they do that, for some sort of social capital. And I feel like that's how a lot of my characters are. And I put them through a lot. Like my daydreams are violent. They all have tragic backstories.
Same. None of my daydreams are ever like happy, honestly. Like sometimes I'll get the rare like super heartwarming moment where like I tear up in real life and I'm just like, what did I do to deserve such a nice moment? But usually it's like full of misery and I'm just rocking back and forth for hours. Like, this is fine. I am daydreaming about death and tears and horribleness, but it's fine.
I was checking the sub this morning, and one of the posts was, and we get these posts like all the time, but it was about finding your way to healthy through making something of your daydreams real. Use them as inspiration, use them to inspire yourself to be the person you daydream that you could be. But one of the replies, oh my God, it was perfect. It was like, they were like, I'm pretty sure I don't want to get kidnapped and tortured. So
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
there's like this this limit to us in the real world versus everything that we daydream about. Like sometimes I spoke about this before. Sometimes our daydreams will be violent and it will be like yikes, but for us, hey, it works and maybe that's our way of coping with the real world and stuff like that. So I feel like well, the intention behind that post was probably really good. It's yeah, not everyone has the sunshine and rainbows for their daydreams.
honestly, for me, even though all of my, well, not all, I should say most of my daydreams at least have some bit of like tragicness to them, I do take inspiration from my daydreams all the time, like the way I dress. A lot of people compliment me because they're like, "Oh, you wear like all these cool patterns and colors and stuff." And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, this is literally because this is how I daydreamed like myself to be, you know? So I don't know. I take a lot of inspiration from my daydreams, but at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that like gets me down in the dumps. Like, I don't know. I do a lot of like, for example, there's this artist called Arca. She's amazing, but I listen to her music sometimes while daydreaming, and like I just like picture kind of like a music video, but like me living through like my traumas and like fighting back and stuff. So it really does like influence me, I guess, positively in my real life, but it also gets me down like negatively because then I can like focus on my pain and my daydreams and it feels like I can't escape it. And I don't know, it's this weird line that I'm like dancing on. Like,
They had noted, I don't know how common this is. This paper was, when was this paper put out? It looks like it was written 2015, published 2016. So, not too long ago, but before the awareness boom that we had. And they say interviewees tended to develop ongoing stories, sometimes alternating between favorite inner worlds that could evolve infinitely, much like a daily TV soap opera. And that is definitely how mine play out. But is that how you guys, how yours play out? Like I've heard people say, like, "Oh, my plot threads only last for a few days or a week."
for me, it's it's really weird. But let me try to explain this. Um, okay. So when I was like about I don't know when Attack on Titan first came out. I think I was like probably like 13 or something. I started like developing maladaptive daydreaming disorder. I think I was kind of doing it already, but it was like kind of new to me. But I was watching Attack on Titan, and there's this one scene where Aaron, the main character, is like in this courtroom and he's just getting beaten and yelled at and berated, but then he like proves himself to everyone and he's like, screw you. And I just remember that scene and I just became so attached with like that courtroom. So I started daydreaming in that courtroom and like I've never really had I mean, it's hard because sometimes I do have some plots that go on, but usually they're like not very long at all. Maybe they last like a day or two. But I usually have like random spurts of like different plots. Like it changes throughout a daydreaming episode in the same courtroom with all these different characters. Like sometimes I'll implement like other characters, very confusing. But then a few years later, I watched the TV show Hannibal, and there's this like courtroom scene, and I immediately just shifted onto that. I was like, this is my new setting. So now I just daydream in that setting. It's been like years. Always just a courtroom with like different plots going on sometimes, but it's usually just like random stuff inspired by music and other media and it's chaotic.
So, for me, it's actually really weird because Attack on Titan is like a big part of my daydreams as well, just because of the show's raw emotion and stuff like that going on. But um, for me, I feature in my own daydreams as like the protagonist, and this idealized version of myself would have like his own story, right? And then with each new hyperfixation, that hyperfixation and the stories that come with that sort of just interweave into this big world that this person or my parami, we'll just call it my parami, that he lives through and that he has to do with. And a lot of it has to do with, certain specific scenes from movies or from anime or from games or stuff like that, or even in real life interactions. And one is the movie Jumper, which really inspired like my parami like the character behind My Parami, where he could sort of just jump between fictional worlds, you know, have these interactions with these characters, and that way I sort of made sense to myself how my character would interact with new hyperfixations or other characters and so forth. And it's never been the same location, but well, it's sort of been the same location, like the same world in my mind. But I do definitely keep building onto it, and sometimes I go back to previous things and stuff like that. So it's never like a variety of different, things that's happening. It always involves these hyperfixations or these characters and my parami, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I also have noticed this is like a new development for me. It started like 2 months ago or so when I like graduated high school. Um, so there's like the normal daydreaming where like I rock back and forth and then I have this like courtroom scene or whatever. But other times I will just be like laying down and I will just zone out, like not even moving a muscle. And like usually I will daydream about like me with like characters that I really like. So it's a lot different because it takes place in like different settings and like the courtroom. Like I don't think the courtroom has ever made it in like those daydreams where I'm just like lying still, zoned out. But I end up like usually falling asleep while doing that. But obviously when I'm like actually rocking back and forth and like maladaptively daydreaming, then I can't fall asleep. But usually I daydream about like self inserts. Sometimes like I have to be in the mood for it, but other times it's just like other characters interacting with like other characters that I like, and I don't know. I have this like weird fixation on this one character. I don't feel comfortable really naming him. He's from a show, but like I have this weird fixation on him, and I daydream about him doing things all the time, and yeah. So I don't know, media just really gets to me as like a maladaptive daydreamer.
It is so weird, like what your brain will latch onto. So like the weirdest origin I have for like a character, I I can't script my daydreams or anything. Things just pop in and out of existence, and sometimes I know where they come from, and a lot of the times I don't. But this one I know exactly where he came from. Fable 3. I believe it's Fable 3, the one with the spire. I don't know if you've ever played that game, but in that game you go there's part of the game where you have to go to like this spire that the bad guys are building, and you're like undercover with all the slaves and stuff that are building it. And I'm walking through the spire, and there's one NPC with his back to me fixing a wall or something. And that was it. 1 second of goddamn gameplay. I just walked past this NPC, didn't even see his face, just saw him from the back. Bam, new character, full blown backstory. And he's now like a main character. It was weird. Like the brain just grabs random things and throws them in there. It doesn't matter what it is.
There's actually this one thing that I think about a lot, and I don't know if other people can relate to that, but it's similar to what you're talking about, Dimmer. Is like when I'm engaged with a certain type of media and it's new, or like let's say I'm playing a game, then there is a specific type of character that my brain will just zoom in on, and like you said, it's like 1 second, that's the guy, that's the character. Cool. New para, it's like it's really I want to say spontaneous, but it's just I immediately know which one it's gonna be, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's really weird. I don't know if you guys experience that as well, but yeah, like Dimmer said, it's just that 1 second of seeing a specific character and being like, okay, you're the chosen one.
I'm just saying, when I first got into Game of Thrones, okay, there's like a million characters on that freaking show. My daydreams became so chaotic. It was just flashes of, because I can't really like, I mean, I can keep a scene going for a bit, kind of like a movie scene, but usually like my brain works fast and it's just like all these different things happening. But like I had all these different characters from the show and like all these different scenes from the show, and it was just a chaotic mess in my brain because I had attached myself to like all these different storylines, and I was like, I want to live through all these characters in my head right now.
I've noticed a trend. I don't want to get us too far off topic, but like as we're talking, I'm wondering if you guys do it too. So I've noticed that if a character is going to be inspired by media, because they're never the actual character, they have a different personality or a different backstory, or elements of them are the same. They're inspired by that character, but they're not that character. But it's never, in my case, a main character. Like it's never the protagonist of the book I'm reading. It's always some side character. And I think my theory on why that is, why it's always some random side character, is that there's enough detail to get you started with a backstory, but because they're not main characters, because they're just secondary or tertiary characters, there's enough lacking that you can build whatever you want on top of it.
I really agree with that. And for me, it's always also the main character. Not sorry, not the main character, but the side characters. It's like it's absolute hell because like when you're on social media and you're looking for like fan art or some type of fan content of these characters, there's just like nothing. But for me, it's always the villains. I don't know why. I guess it's because they're more interesting and it's that misunderstanding thing. But there's like this emotional connection for me when it comes to picking characters. Like I really need to be able to sort of see myself in that position where I could sit down with them and have a conversation, as crazy as that sounds, and just get them. Like if I speak to a main character, I'd be like, dude, like we are completely different. And yeah, I don't know. That's just how I see it, but with the detail as well, filling in details, uh being creative, like letting your MD just flow.
Yeah, so I daydream about like this character from a TV show, and he's in this like courtroom, right? He's being put on trial, and he's like true to his character from like the show. But anyways, he's being put on trial, but little did they know that he had this secret life in filmmaking and stuff, and he was actually in a few shows. So that's how I ended up like, I guess that's one of my ways of like escaping the courtroom, even though I can't escape it. It's like I found like this little worm like hole for me to like wiggle in. But he was put on trial. They show this clip of him in like this movie as like evidence for some reason, even though it wouldn't actually make sense logically as evidence. But they're all watching this show that he's in, and it's based on like Daenerys Targaryen because I freaking love her. She's from Game of Thrones, but I was able to like take aspects of her and like Game of Thrones, but also like The Witcher and stuff. And I incorporated all of that and I made it into like my own thing. So that's sometimes what I daydream about as well.
One more thing in here that in the content section. It's one sentence, and I don't think they ever mention it again. So the sentence is, MD often develop first in childhood with scenarios typically based on cartoon characters. Because so many of us start so young. And I feel like I've mentioned this to other people and they've been like, "Oh yeah, my first ones were cartoons too." Like, did you guys start on with like cartoon characters?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, when I was young, like uh my dad would often sort of say like, "Oh, imagine this character doing that," or "Imagine this character doing that," or whatever. So there was I was so invested in fiction and characters that I feel like that really led me also into the whole character thing about maladaptive daydreaming, like actually having characters and having myself in there and stuff like that. So I definitely feel like it started off with engaging myself too much in those cartoons. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, with me, okay. So I think I don't know, I was really infatuated by like movies and characters when I was younger, but I don't know if I was like maladaptively daydreaming. But it's kind of weird because I'm thinking now, my parents, I don't know what you call it. Um, it's like it's circular and you like put your baby in the middle of it. There's like a little seat in the middle and the baby can just like bounce up and down and like play with toys.
Oh, Walker?
I don't know. It's maybe, but it was fun. Like I would like bounce up and down in it and like play like with toys all around me. And I remember just watching movies and just bouncing and like I don't know, maybe that could have been like the start of my daydreaming. But I also had this like I was spoiled rotten. Like I had so many toys, but Littlest Pet Shops, like I would play with the little animals and make like stories with them. And for hours and hours and hours, every single day, I would just be in my room playing with these little toys and making stories. Like, I was just fully obsessed with doing that. And like, I think that just developed into something more, like into daydreams, because I wanted to like actually put myself in the stories that I was making because I didn't want to like live my real life. So,
I did not start with cartoons, but I think that's probably because I lacked access to cartoons. I we lived in a tiny little cabin in the woods. Like I started daydreaming before we had television, and my I remember my earliest daydreams, and they were real people. They were no one I knew. They weren't based on media. They were, original creations, I guess. I think anyway. I don't know. Maybe there's something I saw that inspired them, but as far as I'm aware, they just sort of popped into my head fully grown, like Athena. And but I do know that later on, the bad guys, and oh my god, it's because I have the same paracosm that I had when I was 5. There are so many elements of it that are left over from my early childhood. So the bad guys, I called them the pig Nazis because I was like 6. So and they later when Nintendo came out, we eventually ended up with a Super Nintendo, and the bad guys, the like earliest iteration of them was the turtles from Super Mario Brothers. And I called them bees. I don't know why I called them bees, but I did. And they were the pig Nazis.
There's one thing that I wanted to touch on, which is sort of related to this, but not really. But it's like in the under the relationships part of the study, which is the one quote from one of the interviewees where they said, "My imagined perfect family is a lot different from my family in reality. It's like actually having a family life of how I want it to be, setting up this perfect little world inside my head." over time it changed. I am married. I have like 11 children, 12 grandkids. I live in a very comfortable life with my family. We all go on holidays. Everything is just really good. Um, speaking of the the things that sort of influence us, I feel like also jumping off of the whole sentence about our childhood scenarios being based on cartoon characters or just media in general, I feel like these types of things also sort of get portrayed in the media that we consume even as kids. And I feel like with time that might also just build up on that. I don't know how you all feel about that though. Can you agree with this? Because for me, it's like, the first part of the quote, just my imagined perfect family is a lot different from my family in reality. Uh, it's like how different their worlds and their minds are, and how much more perfect it is in comparison to how they feel in real life. Um, yeah, so just the way that media sort of influences that. Do you guys feel that media often influenced your daydreams so much that your daydreams have this sort of perfection side to it? Or is it more just like whichever?
Yes, but in a backwards way. I will pull things from media, but my daydreams aren't contingent on media. But I mean, of course, I live in a modern world. There's no way it's not influencing my daydreams. But my characters' families and relationships and friends, like, they're very much not perfect. There's nothing ideal. These are not family dynamics I would wish for my own family. Um, there is, just a lot of drama and a lot of hurt and a lot of hate. But even with all of that, I would say this kind of rings true because the bonds that they have, even when they hate each other or betray each other, are so strong and deep, much more strong and deep than I think I would ever reasonably expect to experience in real life. So even in the dysfunction, there is something much deeper and more pure than reality usually offers.
Yeah, for me, I don't really know if this is like a a family dynamic per se, but when it comes to dating, I can't. I like want to be in a relationship because in my daydreams, like there's a lot of like different relationships that I'm seeing, and I'm just like, I wish, I wish, I wish. So when I go hunting, like on Tinder and stuff for people, I'm just like, none of these people fulfill these expectations made by my daydreams. Like, that's why I like stop talking to literally everyone I meet on all these like dating apps and stuff because it's just they immediately do not give me the vibes that like my character that I like gives, you know? And it's really it's really sad because I feel like I'll never meet the right person because of it. But I don't know. Maybe these expectations are good to have for relationships because they're not really like toxic, but at the same time it's just no one fulfills these expectations. So like are these expectations too high? It's very messy.
Perfection is a lot to place on a real person with independent thought and autonomy.
Yeah, it is like it makes it difficult because I really it's kind of, yeah, I relate to that a lot because the relationships in my daydreams, like Dimmer mentioned, it's not there's a lot of stuff going on, but that bond, that that the characters have or whatever. For me, it's also like I really struggle with relationships in real life. Like it's just I yeah, I'm really bad at them, and just like having relationships in your mind, these they just work out. But it's also that sense of control that comes in. You have control over this character and what's going to happen and all that type of stuff, where placing that perfection, on real life is not a good thing to do, but it's so difficult to not do it. So yeah, for me, it's just there's no perfection in the relationship sense, but it's, you know, I don't know, like Taylor mentioned, it's just these characters fulfill you in a way that real life really could maybe, but where do you even begin to like find people like that, and then there's other factors that come into play. Um, but it's for me in my daydreams, like I don't have to worry about being LGBT or whatever in my daydreams, where in real life it's like a constant threat. So in that way, it's more perfect. But in other ways, like in the theme context, like relationships or the social status, that is less like sunshine and happiness, but it's still more fulfilling, if that makes sense. Let me see. I think it's yeah, I mean, I usually look at the quotes that people give, like the one in the middle that she said, or sorry, that they said, the first memory that I have is a daydream about saving people. It's again, it's that same want for having something good happen or something like that. I don't know if it makes sense, and sorry if I'm rambling. It's just like I feel like I get it, wanting that perfect life, even though things aren't perfect, but you want those specific details in your daydreams. Um, the last sentence of the last quote says, "I get addicted to that because I can't replicate that in real life." So yeah, it's hard. It's really difficult, dealing with these types of things, like the great daydreams versus the real life, which isn't as great. So yeah, I mean, sorry, I know that this basically doesn't have to do with the social status and the relationship stuff directly, but it's sort of related.
Yeah, I'm having a thought here. That last sentence that you pointed out, I get addicted to that because I can't replicate that in real life. Um, like, yes, like I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that, but not because I can't replicate it in real life, but because I can't accept it in real life. Trying to think how to explain this. So recognition, right? Everybody wants, recognition for the things that they do well and their achievements. Um, and I found that a little bit. I feel like I do a few things well. Um, the podcast. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, Levi, but people will thank us for making a podcast if it helped them in some way. They'll be like, "Oh, thank you for doing that." And I can't take those kind of compliments. I can't take that recognition. Like, even when I have found recognition for something that I've done that has helped someone, I'm like, oh, whew, thanks, buddy. It was nothing. Go away now. I love you. Bye.
I don't like experience the awkwardness with compliments, like people thanking me, but I do experience the awkwardness with like direct compliments, like to me as a person, because I'm always like, what are you saying? Why? But in my daydreams, it's like it's something that just happens. So I get what you mean with that, where it's like that, yeah.
My daydreams, they give me an ego. Like, honestly, when someone like compliments me, like personally, or I mean, back in high school, I was, like, obsessed with theater and stuff. I just wanted to always be on the stage, and then I joined student exec, which is, like, they run the school and do all the events. So I was always, like, in the assemblies, like, talking to all the students. Like, I just loved attention and, like, getting compliments and being told, "Your writing is amazing," like, "The way you see things is amazing," because in my head, I was like, "It's because I'm a daydreamer," and it kinda felt like a superpower to me, but obviously COVID happened, and then I quickly realized, no, this is not a good thing to have most of the time.
The next part of the paper is the experiential properties of the MD experience. And what they're kind of going over is well, the experience of it. Like, what does it feel like?
Oh,
Um
I think it's like having to do, but it's really weird though because um like
yeah.
just going off the sensory stuff, I'm looking at the first comment here where they say there are no smells and I do not see in great details, but the pictures are pretty clear as if you are watching a movie. For me, sounds and smells and stuff like that are definitely present. I am a very, very like I am sensory overload in my daydreams, where in reality it's a bit it feels a bit more fake. But yeah, I don't know. Like, do you guys have sensory stuff going on while daydreaming? Like I don't know. For me, sound is like and emotion are the two big ones for me.
A little bit right after that paragraph that you talk about it goes on to say that some others um it feels like reality. Like reality. They can hear and taste and stuff. I think I'm sort of in the middle, honestly, cuz it's it's definitely realistic in a lot of ways, but it's not like reality. Like if and because and I'm not there. Like it's not even happening to me. So I feel like any sensory input that I'm getting is more sympathetic because I would be experiencing it through like watching a character do it. So like oh my god, like if my like let's say a character like ate some gross food and then like kissed their partner. Like I would feel like my mouth is dirty and that should not be happening. If one of them like grabbed a handful of sand, like I wouldn't feel the sand in my hand, but I would feel a little like gritty. If somebody's working out and they're sweaty and disgusting, I feel a little, not like I need to go run and take a shower because I'm sweaty, but I feel a little gross. There's a touch of it, but it's not like reality.
For me, I don't think I really, like, taste things or smell things, but I do definitely, like, see the daydreams like a movie. I do feel the emotions, however, like, very strongly. Like, sometimes I'll make facial expressions because of it, but, like, smell and taste is, I think, a no.
Yeah, I catch like I know I just went off like on touch, but it's kind of the same with the other senses too. Um, I don't want to say I smell something because I know I don't smell something, but it's like a remembering a smell, I guess. Like it's there a little bit, like your brain is picking up on it even though there's nothing there. And hearing auditory is one that it's almost there. It's like a touch. And once in a while, it will actually sound real. Like if I get real deep for a second there, I like hit saturation and it suddenly feels real. And it happens most often with with sound. And I'll hear their voice for real. and it always snaps me out like immediately. It's almost like a hypnagogic hallucination. You know, like when you're falling asleep and you hear a voice. And
Oh,
yeah. But that it doesn't last, because if I hit that point where I'm so deep I actually hear them, it snaps me out of it.
it's like I'm wondering if any of you have like a thing. Okay, well, maybe not, but for me, I oftentimes get like these auditory hallucinations, which sort of has to do with my daydreams. Sometimes I would just like hear a door close or something, but it wouldn't be when I'm actually in the present, when I'm aware that I'm in a present, but when I'm sort of dozing off. And it's, yeah, like Dimmer, when you just said that, that sort of snaps you out of it, I realize that that is really something that snaps me out of it, except I don't really daydream about it happening. Um, but yeah, it's really interesting how our mind just sort of like makes this, well, tries to make it, as vivid and as it's almost like I'm trying to think of like some sci-fi thing where I don't know, let's say people are playing a game and they just become part of the game, it's something like that, becoming part of this weird like thing, that we daydream about, this movie in our minds. It's very interesting. And then further down it goes off into the emotional properties, which is something that for me it's like the emotional side of my daydreams are really important for me, because when I daydream about something that's really sad, it's insanely sad. Like it's very easy for me to cry on cue just because I can daydream about it. But it's just the emotion has a big effect on me, but it's still so important to me. So I don't know, like, do you guys feel that the emotional things happening in your daydreams have an effect on you in real life? Like, would you daydream about something sad and then feel sad in real life or as you come out of it? Or is that more of a controlled thing for you?
I guess that's why acting was so easy for me, because I could easily just become the character in my head. So as I was like saying the lines or acting or doing this with my body, like I was picturing it in my head. And I I don't want to say that, like, sorry, let me clear my throat for a second. I love having smoker lungs. Anyways, um no, like I found it very easy to like connect to the characters I was portraying, and it also made talking to people like very different, because the way that I would like make my face look, or the way I would present myself to other people, I was very conscious of how I looked, because I was always thinking about it like in my head, and like daydreaming about like what I would look like to other people and stuff. So, like when I'm talking to people, I'll also notice things like that they're doing that I don't know how to explain it. It's like I don't want to call myself judgy, but I tend to like see certain quirks about people and I'm just like, how are you not like conscious about that? And it's just very, I don't know. I'm always like worrying about how I'm looking to other people and like how I'm moving and stuff. I don't know, it's weird. But I don't even know if that's like daydreaming related, but it definitely like I think my daydreams have just made me more aware of how I may look to other people and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I could go off on a couple of anecdotes about exactly that. But I don't want to get us too far off topic. Um, Emotionally though, like as like Levi had started us out, it's super emotional. I don't even know how to describe it. The feelings that they have are big and uncontaminated. Like in real life, there's a lot of conflict, and maybe you don't know what you're feeling, but in the daydream, it's you know what it is. Because it's powerful and I guess more pure in a way. Not that they don't have emotional conflict, but even then, like the conflicting emotions are more real, or not more real, but more. The only word I can think of is pure. I don't really feel like that's the right word, but it's the only one I can think of. And not just their emotions, but like in real life, I don't react appropriately to things. Um, I don't feel a lot of highs and lows. Like I'm not dead inside, I'm not super numb or anything. But I don't have high peaks and I don't have low lows like are experienced through my daydreams.
And then, like, one thing that I was interested in also asking is, sometimes, well, like I said, my daydreams influence real life as well, but the reverse as well. Like, for me, real life really influences my daydreams. So if I'm sad in real life, then that emotional, like, baggage, it's probably going to carry over into my daydreams. So, yeah.
I have, it's kind of assumed, but not entirely diagnosed, borderline personality disorder. So I don't want to like go out there and say that I 100% have it. But however, I try to like manage my emotions as if I have that disorder because of like things that I've been like told by like doctors previously. Um, but yeah, I just feel like emotions very strongly, and I can go from like 0 to 100. Like, if one thing triggers me, I will be like beyond angry. Like, I have really uncontrollable anger from like a lot of traumas that I recently went through. So, like, yeah, that definitely like 100% influences my daydreams, like at all times. It's definitely been my way of like coping with the strong emotions I feel as well, because that way I'm able to be like extremely angry and evil and harsh and cruel in like my daydreams, but like I'm not doing that in real life. So it's like kind of a way to like let loose without actually like hurting anyone or like ruining my life. So yeah.
That is so wild how we're like polar opposites in that way. Like I mean you experience real emotion so strongly and I don't at all. I don't know if mine I don't feel like what's happening in real life, like what I'm going through, the emotions that I'm having have an effect on my daydreams. I think that it does in a very, very broad way. Like with the benefit of hindsight, I can look back and be like, oh, my teenage years were really difficult. And that's when my maladaptive daydreaming was at its worst. And the sort of most common theme through those years was this. And I can see trends that way, but they happen over the course of years, not days, and they are not like mood dependent. It's like the difference between climate and weather. And as far as my daydreams, the other way around, my daydream is influencing my real actions. Also, not really. Um, I do get the sympathetic, like if I'm daydreaming something terrible happening to one of my characters, like I will be feeling those sympathetic emotions. I will be crying or laughing or smiling or, whatever in real life, like making the weird facial expressions, doing the weird whispery thing that we do. I do that. When I come out of it, there might be a touch of carryover, but it lasts moments.
There's one like quote here where someone said, and it's what we spoke about earlier, the last quote under, well, not the last, but the second quote under emotional properties. I feel the need to create negative situations in the daydream to arouse a certain feeling inside of me that obviously isn't positive, but I do it anyway. It's another one of the addictions of MD. I have characters in my daydreaming that I don't particularly like, that I kind of make as poisonous as possible. So it's just, like carrying that type of stuff over into daydreams. Yeah, it's really interesting how different it can be between maladaptive daydreamers. Like some people saying that, well, their daydreams don't affect them and they don't affect their daydreams and vice versa. Where for other people, for me, it's like they 100% do. And yeah, it's just interesting to see the differences like that. Like how some people would have a complete emotional sort of link to their daydreams and others don't really. But yeah, it's just something that I wanted to note as well.
I had latched onto that part that you were just mentioning there about the sort of negative daydreams or the averse emotions, because my daydreams have always been violent. That's been a hallmark of like my style, I guess, since the first daydream I can remember when I was 5 years old. Even that one was violent. And I just wanted to note, like a bit further down, right after the part that Levi just read, is that they point out that the key word is create. Many respondents reported actively seeking the experience of averse emotions. None of the interviewees described these fantasies as facilitating grief or as processing past trauma. Not only did their scripted, upsetting imagery evoke negative feelings, it was also somehow enjoyable. So these are not. I just want to point out that although intrusive daydreams can happen to maladaptive daydreamers, like the violence in most of our daydreams, the violence in my daydreams, it's not intrusive. It's part of the story.
Yeah, like and intrusive daydreams would be like, stuff that we really don't want to daydream about, things that we don't want to think about. And I made a video about it a long time ago where I spoke about, my cat getting sick and immediately my MD just fires off. Like what's the absolute worst that can happen? I don't have a car. Who am I gonna contact in the middle of the night to take me to the vet? All that type of stuff. And like that would be the intrusive daydreams, right? Like stuff that actually has a bad effect on you. But on the other hand, like I have violent daydreams and stuff like that, but that's stuff that I feel like I need to express in my daydreams for whatever reason, whether it's dealing with emotions, coping with real life being too harsh, getting my anger against other people out in my mind, stuff like that. So I feel like that's sort of a good way to look at it. Intrusive is what we don't want to think about, but we're maladaptive daydreamers, so our brain is sort of gonna do it anyway. I don't know if any of you experience that, but my brain with maladaptive daydream with intrusive thoughts, my mind is just it's an absolute nightmare. It's so difficult for me to get out of intrusive daydreams. But the violent ones that I have, or like the stuff that goes on in my daydreams, those do not have the same effect as intrusive daydreams.
A lot of my daydreams have to like do with traumas that I've gone through. Like my for example, like certain characters will relive parts of my past, or like I will be the one reliving it, but usually that's not very common because that can be actually like very triggering to me. But my traumas are always just somehow underlying all my daydreams. Like, I'm pretty sure that the reason why I started daydreaming was because I always felt like an outsider. Like, I was always picked on every single year in school. I was just picked on, and it was always something new. Like, my family wasn't like too bad. Obviously, there's like a lot of traumatic moments in my family, but like I villainized my family for a bit. Like I ran away and stuff, and just like I don't know, I felt like bad things are always going to happen to me, so I also just made bad things happen to myself. And my daydreams are always just about like my pain and my anger and my frustration, just like put into all these different characters, even if the plot of the scene doesn't really like correlate with traumas that I've gone through. The emotions at least feel the way I felt in those moments. So
So you think you might actually be processing past traumas through your MD?
yeah, and I think it's like it's hard to explain. It just feels like my pain and frustration and like all the negative stuff and everything is just never going to go away because that is just the staple of my daydreams. So
So I think that this paper was written kind of early on, and I think that there's a lot more reasons for the violence and negative emotions than this paper touches on when it's with its small little sample size, a few years ago, 2016, 2015 when it was done. So even though in this study, where none of the interviewees described their fantasies as facilitating grief or as processing past trauma, I do think that that is a role that MD plays in some people's lives. Just anecdotally, I feel like a lot of the people who have violent fantasies maybe fall more into like more in line with what this paper is saying, where it's they call it benign masochism or hedonic reversal, an enjoyment of negative sensations and feelings thought to be possible in the context of feeling safe and reflecting pleasure at mind over body. So it's the mechanism that lets us watch horror films without being horrified, and lets us go on roller coasters without, feeling like we're in certain imminent danger. But if we weren't getting something out of it, because I'm going to assume, I do not want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to assume that in processing past trauma through your daydreams, your brain, at least, even if you might not be entirely conscious of why, is getting something out of it. Because if it wasn't, I'm not sure it would be MD. Like not in your specific case. I'm sorry. I'm kind of focusing on you, but I don't mean just you. But if someone were to have daydreams constantly that were just absolutely distressing and causing panic attacks, like that's not generally where the distress from maladaptive daydreaming comes from. If that's happening to you, anyone in the audience, where your daydreams themselves are the distressing part, you might have a comorbid condition that you want to look into, maybe like something like OCD or something that causes intrusive thoughts.
yeah, for me, none of my like daydreams have like caused like panic attacks or anything like that. Like maybe they've made me like a little bit more miserable, but they haven't like actually like been like this huge trigger for me, because it's honestly it's always been like comforting, even if I'm like daydreaming about like the worst that I've ever felt in my life, or all my characters are just dying gruesome deaths, I'm just like, oh, well, this is nice. This feels comforting.
Yeah, I definitely think there's more reasons that MDers have violence and averse emotions than the paper touched on it. But it's an early paper. It's an early paper with a small sample size. Let's just take it for what it is. Which yeah, just leads us into the last couple parts of the paper. There's every paper at the end sums up its conclusion, and sometimes the future direction and its limitations. And this paper is limited in a couple of ways. It's a qualitative paper, and it maybe can't be generalizable to other MDers. Like we were just saying, like there are things that really might not match up with some of our experiences.
I think another good part that they actually included under limitations is the last sentence where they said, another possible limitation of the study is associated with the potential hindrances to revealing very personal information and all fantasy contents during a single remote interview with a stranger. So this was even a remote interview as well. Yeah, and this was basically, recorded as people's personal stories. Um, it was basically, people saying, this is how I feel, this is how I experience MD. And like Dimmer said, it's a very limited study. And the good thing about these studies is that it does mention that it's limited as well. So even, if you don't agree with everything here, that is perfectly okay. Because maladaptive daydreamers are different people and we have our differences, our different ways of being raised, different environments, different daydreams, all that type of stuff. So, I feel like you should know if you are a maladaptive daydreamer or if you think you're a maladaptive daydreamer, look into the proposed diagnostic criteria. Don't just go off of these studies because just because you don't experience MD the same way that anyone else in this paper does, doesn't mean that you're invalid or anything like that. So yeah, do keep the limitations in mind. But other than that, I feel that, thinking of this paper as a whole, I can quite relate to a few of things that have been said in this paper.
Yeah, this paper, as limited as it is, like it's like we chose it for a reason. It is foundational. It is a keystone kind of paper for maladaptive daydreaming. Like we said, it was only the third paper ever written on maladaptive daydreaming. They didn't even know what friggin' questions to ask yet. And some of them maybe didn't hit quite right. They got vague answers that can't really be generalized to other maladaptive daydreamers. But there's other stuff in here that just was starting to uncover so much about the maladaptive daydreaming experience. The violence came up. That's an aspect of MD that can be so upsetting, I guess, to maladaptive daydreamers if they don't know where it's coming from because they think there's something wrong with them. And this is the first paper to say like, no, there's probably nothing wrong with you. Like it just happens. So yeah, like you can see important things coming out of this paper.
And I feel like honestly, as we move through more papers, if we're going to talk about more papers and more studies, as time goes on, these papers will be a bit more in depth, a bit more detailed, and it's like Dimmer mentioned, it's a very early paper, so it's very foundational, but it's still very important, to get the stuff that was said in this paper to get it out there, to let people who are new to maladaptive daydreaming, who just found the community, who just found the term, or just people who just want to learn about it, even if they're not maladaptive daydreamers. it's so important to just establish that understanding that this thing is valid. Even if people don't have it all the same, you're not gonna be invalid just because, for example, like your daydreams don't match up with someone else or something like that. So yeah, I feel like the basics are in there, and I feel like it was a really good paper to go through just to get that reminder out there that we we have this thing that we deal with, and we want to get the word out there. So yeah.
Any last thoughts, Taylor?
I mean, I overall really liked the paper. Like, I felt very seen and heard throughout, like, a lot of it. However, there were some instances, like, for example, with the whole trauma part, that I was like, I mean, like, I have a little different experience, but other than that, I think it does really well, especially with the violence part, because oftentimes, even in the, like, daydreaming, film that just came out recently, I don't think they really touched on violence or anything, did they? Like, it doesn't really come up that often, but when it does, it's like daydreamers, like, at least a lot of daydreamers are like, "Oh, like, I can relate to that, like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in my head that's maybe, like, a little violent." But, yeah, I just felt very, like, seen.
Yeah, I felt a little put off by the sensory components section, which was in part 1 of this podcast. So if you didn't hear part 1, you can go back and listen to that. Or necessary conditions. It was necessary conditions. They're like necessary conditions: movement, music, solitude. None of which are necessary for me to daydream. Music does make it better. I have never paced or had a repetitive movement, so that's a non-item. And solitude, also preferable, but not absolutely necessary. So that one didn't hit. That one didn't hit me as like particularly relevant to my experience. But overall, yes, I really like this paper. It's one of my favorites. So nerdy to say like I have a favorite research paper.
Yeah, and I really like the way that it was set out as well. It was easy to read, and I feel like the relatability to what people said, quoting them directly, I feel like that's so important so that we hear it from the maladaptive daydreamers themselves, and not just like, the one of the researchers or one of the writers saying this person said this, but instead actually quoting what they said to get to that idea of what they're feeling, how they're coping with it, and stuff like that. It just makes it feel a bit more relatable as maladaptive daydreamers to read through papers like that, where it's not just indirect quoting, it's direct quoting. So I really like that as well. But that's my basic feedback on the paper overall.
That's it for this episode of Parallel Lives. If you would like to be a guest or would just like to sit in as part of the audience, there's a link to the Discord down below. There's a couple of other links there to a few resources and stuff. Subscribe, like, follow, whatever the button is on whatever platform you're listening on. We publish episodes on the 1st and the 16th of every month.